the role of art in shaping civic culture. Tonight, we're going to be talking about this broad topic from the perspective of identity and solidarity. But before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to touch on a few of the logistical considerations for our time together. First, you'll notice that there is a CC button at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you click on that, closed captions will appear. So feel free to use that tool if it will be helpful to you in any way. Second, I also wanted to point out that the chat function is open. Please do use that to introduce yourself. We would love to know who is joining us this evening, where you're calling in from, and what has brought you into conversation with us. Finally, I did also want to note that we are recording tonight's session, so do feel free to mute your camera if you do not want to be captured on the recording. These housekeeping matters aside, I'm super excited to be continuing the Create, Connect, Catalyze discussion series with tonight's focus on identity and solidarity. And I wanted to offer just a bit of a preview for tonight's event. Our time together will unfold in roughly 3 parts. First, building on our last session, which was focused on representation and power, we're going to sort of continue that conversation, but this time we're going to look inward and think about ourselves and how we would like to be seen by others. Then we're going to get the chance to hear from tonight's guest artists and educators, Sam Richardson and V. Haddad, who will discuss the self-portrait service, which is a photography project that they've been facilitating with members of LGBTQ communities. And finally, in the third part of tonight's event, we're going to take a step back to kind of zoom out and to consider the expressive power of imagery and the role of images in reshaping ideas about who we are, not only as individuals, but as individuals in relation to others. That being said, I also wanted to give just a bit of a disclaimer that tonight's event might feel a little bit different than other events that you may have been to on Zoom. And that's because tonight's event is intended to feel like more of a conversation. And by that, I mean, it's not a webinar or a class or a lecture. Tonight's event isn't even an artist talk in the traditional sense per se. And the reason for that is simple. While we might have ideas about identity and solidarity, we are by no means the only authority, or not even an authority on this topic, really. We understand that everyone is bringing their own ideas about identity and solidarity to the table. And actually, we feel that your voices and ideas will only enrich the conversation. On that note, I am excited to more formally and properly introduce Sam Richardson and V. Haddad, our guest artists and educators tonight. What I'm particularly excited about V and Sam's work is that their project really does challenge conventional ideas about ownership and authorship in the arts. Their self-portrait service is a photography project that engages a participatory approach to image making in order to create self-determined representations of the LGBTQ community, resulting in work that I think is both imaginative and intimate, but also deeply communal and collaborative. Sam and V, there's a lot more I could say about your work, and I could continue to sing your praises, but really I would, in the interest of time, just simply like to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here with us, sharing space with us, inviting us to understand your practice, and just turn things over to you to take it from here.
Thank you, Raquel, so much, and thank you everyone for coming today. We're really excited to spend some time with you.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. I'm gonna share a slideshow, and we're going to move through a series of writing exercises before we go into our artist talk. So if anybody prefers to write on paper, this might be a time to go grab a writing utensil and some paper, or you could use your devices. And while I'm gonna get that set up really quick. Great. Yeah, we also wanted to kind of briefly echo and maybe clarify how this project functions. And here on the screen right now, we have this kind of BTS photo of one of the portraits we were making with a collaborator, Stephanie, in Los Angeles. And yeah, the process of how we've come to make these images with people has been sort of organic in origin, starting with friends and lovers and exes, and it has been expanding, and now we're starting to make portraits of people we don't have, personal relationships with, although we tend to build them after we do this process. And yeah, the exchange is one where we provide this service for free, and the idea is that whoever wants to collaborate with us and make a self-determined image, we work in service of that person's vision, and our only ask is that that person, or people sometimes, write in response to the experience or what that photo means to them. And so later on, when we show you some of the works that we've made with collaborators, there will be a photo and then their text response as well. Yeah, Sandra, do you want to add anything to that? I feel like I think I got it. No.
I think that covers it. We just wanted to give kind of an intro, a little more extended intro to what the workers will be sharing with you of our own, because it's really informing the writing activity that we're going to do. And as we said, participants in the project have very graciously and generously written in response to the works. And they, as you will see, they're always seen together kind of as a diptych, and in a way are, two portraits. So for our activity, when we were trying to figure out what to do for this talk, we kind of were like, I think writing is the way to go with this, to kind of get those ideas flowing. Both, we'll have some kind of out loud participatory moments, but then internal reflective ones, and it can be private, you can share, we'll get into it. But that sort of, so like it's building up to this idea around self-representation, the image, power dynamics of the camera, and how that relates to an eventual longer conversation on identity and solidarity, both within our work and how we think about those things as artists and the complications of them and the beauty of it, etc.
And before we go into our free writing exercises and free association, we want to do a land acknowledgement. Sam?
So I'll read the land acknowledgement, and also just want to say that this was co-written mostly between myself and actually the youth artists in the youth artist program that I just taught at Urbano for the last 10 weeks. And we included Urbano, myself in Los Angeles, and V. And we also acknowledge that this may not be speaking to everyone who's on this Zoom, but the information that we had coming in. So I will read this. And I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land I stand on is unceded Indigenous lands, specifically the territory of the Chumash, Tongva, and Kiz people. The land that V stands on is the unceded land of the Haudenosaunee people, and the land Urbano project is built on is the unceded land of the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, and Pawtucket people. Beneath the contemporary surface of any site in the United States, there are histories of belonging that have been erased, overlooked, contested, and forgotten, as well as contemporary communities that continue to endure, create, and thrive. As occupiers of these territories, we recognize the continual displacement of Native people by the settler nation of the US. We are aware that land acknowledgements are often used as an empty stand-in for actual decolonization work, which is something to bear in mind while continuing to work and build frameworks to dismantle the ongoing effects of colonial legacy, both in the arts and elsewhere. So that's something that came out of a Urbano collaboration, and also always open for feedback or interpretation or response.
And now we're going to do some writing. Yeah, the preview is we're going to do some free association to some words, like keywords that we think are relevant to the work and some of the stuff we'll be talking about. So the idea is for everybody just to, in the chat, say any word that pops up into your head when we post this list of words, and we'd like for everyone who's open to it, including ourselves, we'll do some reading ourselves, but to read the list that comes up, it kind of formulates almost a poem and kind of gets a read of the room, what we all associate with these ideas. And then after that, we'll do more personal reflection writing, which I guess, to be transparent, it's sort of to formulate an idea of your own self-portrait and what are key elements of that for you.
And so if you want to go to the first word, B. So just as an example, this is the first word and we'll do this one, but popcorn, just whatever word comes into your mind. There's no wrong answers, no wrong interpretations, judgment-free zone. We're just seeing what's kind of like percolating in the room and what we would build together openly. Sorry, windy here. Thanks everyone. I hope everyone had a chance to fill in. If you still want to type something in, you can. And we want to be as, participatory as possible, but also if you're not feeling that right now, that is okay. But if anyone would want to volunteer to just read these words out loud, that would be great. Or me and B can start it off.
I'm happy to do it. I'm Leah.
Thanks, Leah.
Hi. So the words are personal, examination, intimate, the gaze, pose, static, snapshot, vulnerable, posture, painting, privilege, face and shoulders, formal, frame, captured, time, and eyes.
Oh, I love that. Great poem. Great collective poem. Let's do another one.
And the next word is representation.
Excellent. Another volunteer, a reader.
I can start this one off. Maybe someone will warm up for the next one. Okay, representation. Outside, inclusion, voice, presentation, visible, seen, mediation, seen, counted, see self, opportunity, point of view, people, sample. Thanks, everyone. That was great.
Power. Excellent. Also want to say before we continue to ask people to share that we super support and encourage brave space and safe space, as both of us are educators and we want everyone to feel safe and also excited to be able to try to share it together. I'm going to start this one off, but maybe we can find some other brave spaces. Power, uneven, movement, domination, dynamic, hierarchy, strength, love, structure, recognition, money, control, orchestration, striving, unfair, distribution. There.
Thanks, everyone. These are great. I hope it's feeling comfortable enough for you all. We'll do a bit of a temp check of the room after this. Do we have a brave volunteer to read this poem aloud?
I can read this one.
Thank you, Mark.
Go back to the top.
Yeah.
So we have touch, relationship, maintaining, love, gift, foundational, place, consideration, understanding, nurture, tending to, embrace, energy, love, openness and accessibility, attention, relationship, empathy, and intimacy.
Thank you so much for reading that. And thank you, everyone.
Selfie, the next one.
Oh, I'm muted. Do we have another brave volunteer? I think we only have one more after this.
This is a good one.
I can read this one. Let me just scroll up to the top.
Thanks, Raquel.
Okay, selfie. Shy, filter, control, self-absorption, Facebook, iPhone. Shallow, pose, informal, insecurity, document, agency. From above, indulgent, fun. Authorship, awkward, arm, empowering, polarizing.
Thanks, Raquel. And I just want to add, I think EP messaged me maybe privately by mistake with attention. So adding that word in there.
Attention.
attention.
Excellent.
Do we skip over one B?
Yeah, I was thinking we could, for time, do the next section of the free write.
Yeah. We can say that the other words we were thinking about, if you want to have them in your mind, are just collaboration and exploitation, which are also kind of just, all these are elements we're thinking about with our work and also just questioning and down to talk about all the time.
And yeah, thanks everyone for creating these poems. They're really good. And the next leg is sort of asking ourselves questions. They're reflective questions for you to write for yourself. And we will, save space, brave space, ask if people want to share, but no pressure. So yeah, this was good. We got our juices flowing, and now we're going to do this free write of these questions. And the first one is, what are some ways that you feel seen that feel good?
And like we said, this is culminating in an idea of a literal image or a portrait or a photograph, but we kept these statements somewhat vague in whatever you want to respond to. And you can be as personal as you want or not, and really take the words for what they mean to you. Like if you want to think of seen as literal image or seen as in felt and held, it's up to you.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. What are some ways that you feel seen that do not feel good?
And this can also be past tense, could be have been seen, etc. Everyone feel like they had a chance to reflect? Go on to the next one.
Next one. So,
What vision of yourself do you hope to release or let go of? And then the last question, we'll move a bit out of silence, reflective space. What vision of yourself do you hope to hold? And with that, we also expanding verbally to say hold as is or empower more externally, also different ways to think about that terminology. Also, if anyone ever has questions, please drop in the chat or feel free to speak out.
Okay, that's time. And our next place is the free write share. Yeah, I just came to, I can start because I just came to something in the last question of what I'm hoping to hold. And that's just like not fitting into a box. I found myself really concerned with like being misrepresented or misunderstood a lot in just face value imagery, like class being assumed or yeah, like gender. And it felt good to have that goal arise at the end question, just not needing to be neat or fit into that frame. Exactly. Anyone else have an interesting place they arrived as a question?
And you can feel free to share from any of the questions, just one of them or all or a combination too. Or also if this was just interesting to you and brought you anywhere that felt good or productive. We've never done this with a group of people, so we're also intrigued and really excited to hear from you if you feel so inclined.
Yeah, we should also maybe say that this is part of our process with our collaborators. These are some of the questions that you have to think about to determine how you do want to represent yourself.
Yeah, often when we work with anybody, it's not just one conversation. It's often a couple or it's a long conversation. And these are what we've kind of come to realize are the things that come up predominantly. So we thought that that's what we would share with all of you all today. And I can also share. I think I was thinking about, yeah, like the ways that I feel seen that feel good in the past have been similar to what V said, but things when it comes to something like gender, for example, I don't like for people to assume anything because for me, I feel very sort of in the middle of things. And I mean, and transparency, I identify as a non-binary femme person, but I also don't like put that after my name. I don't like intro myself with that. That's just what I sort of personally, internally know myself to be. And it's part of my identity, it's not my whole identity, right? So I like to be, I don't like to be assumed of when I'm seen, basically. I'd rather like to have a conversation, if that makes sense. And then I also want to let go of certain like ingrained desires to perform femininity, for example, because I think that's what people desire, right? But I still do it. It like makes me feel more comfortable, and that kind of falls into a thing about, you know, passing and straightness. And for me, I also don't want to be seen as straight, but I also understand that I do pass as straight often, and that's a privilege, which must be named. But it's like a kind of complex, strange thing. And I don't know if I have an answer of how to represent myself adequately, but it's what I think about sometimes. And then there's more like internal things where it's like, I don't want to be seen as weak, or I don't want to be seen, you know, represented as smoking, because I smoke, but I'm trying to quit. You know, so it can kind of be like a myriad of things. Our identities are complex, and some things aren't as visible, you know. But yeah, that's just some things that came up for me.
Also seeing in the chat, yeah, it's nice, this like arrival of wanting, it's almost like the impossibility, wanting to exhibit possibility, wanting to hold multiplicity, and really wanting to make space for as much as possible in this static image. Yeah, it's really nice to see those responses.
Yeah. May I read it?
Oh,
sorry. May I read out what you wrote, Mark? Sorry.
Sure, if you want.
Unless you want to read it.
I can read it.
Okay, great.
It really echoes a lot of what was already said.
Good.
Yeah, let me close up. I feel good when I'm seen under my conditions intimately. I do not feel good when I'm seen under conditions that are extractive, such as corporate platforms. And I hope to release a vision of myself that is singular, a vision that is not multiple things and that is constraining. A vision of myself that I would like to hold is to embrace this multiplicity, which ties into the neatness that was already mentioned.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, I also wrote something similar, being like, you know, I want to let go of trying to control things, but also I like to know when I'm being seen. And that's like something to consider too. Sometimes I don't like how my body looks, and I want to, you know, I wish I was thinner sometimes, etc. So I like to actually know when I'm being seen, which you can't always control, actually, unfortunately. Although you should be able to. Great.
Shares. And you have just like any of the stuff that you felt good being seen as, like, were there like keywords that just popped up?
Actually, V, when you said not fitting into a box, like I wrote that down and starred it because that was just like a really, I think, good organizing frame for the really like random stuff that I wrote, that I was like, what does this all cohere into? And I think that like perfectly captures it. Something that I think about a lot is that, you know, I am Puerto Rican, like 100% Puerto Rican, and often I'm not seen that way. And then you feel like this weird expectation to perform that in ways that conform to stereotypes. And that's not how I live that identity. And it's not how I see myself. And I've just like this idea of not fitting into a box, which also seems to be a bit of a through line in our chat so far. So I just wanted to name and appreciate that.
Thank you, Raquel, for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other, it's really, yeah. What ways do you feel seen that feel good? That question actually like surprised me in the ways that it came up for me. Like I really wanted to be seen as hardworking and strong and androgynous. And yeah, just naming that. It's having a conversation with yourself. Those things just pop up. Before we move on, does anyone else want to share any of the keywords or?
Or how's everyone doing? Is everyone feeling okay? It's a little slow moving. Is it all right, the pace? Or just like a thumbs up emoji?
Yeah, Jess.
Oh, I was just gonna, I think, the language that you guys kind of set up where I was like thinking a lot about words led me into, I'm prefacing this, led me into like thinking about images. And when I was doing the free write and like thinking about like an image of myself that would make me feel really good, I must say that like the first thing that came up was like on a horse. Which I just think, is like, not related to like a lot of what you guys are saying too, just because, I think about that like psychoanalytic game of like, describe a horse to describe like the ideal lover, and it's just such a like, stereotypical like image of power, so I'm like reading myself a bit and just thinking also just like about images and rambling away in my head, but yeah, that's my share.
Excellent share. Full
Thank
snap.
you.
Very good.
I could share too if there's more time or if someone else wants to share first, but I don't need to.
Would love to hear from you.
Okay. I wrote lots of stuff, but one of the things that I think is a big deal to me, I had the strong and the hardworking, but something that is really important to me is that that I'm seen as relatable. Like, no matter who you are, that there's like some sort of like common ground that's seen. And Jess and I had like just like off little anecdote. Jess and I went to get the car checked out today, and it was a place where like the mechanic shop, no one's wearing a mask. Like I borderline thought we were going to be asked to take our masks off. And we were talking to this guy, and he like knows my family, like my whole family gets their cars worked on there, and so it had this like chummy vibe. But there was this like, he would occasionally like dart eyes between Jess and I, and he was like at the same, like trying to be chummy and relate. And I was like happy for those moments, but there was also like kind of like a darkness of this like other side of assumption that might be happening too, as he like got into talking about like the fact that he doesn't understand white privilege, and he's like holding the keys to my car, and he's like, I've worked every day of my life, I'm like, it's a bunch of bullshit. And like, of course he managed to squeeze in that he like loves Trump because he's not a politician. And so sort of this like wanting to be seen as, not wanting to hold the multiple of like, well, like, A, you have the keys to my car and I want you to work on it and not charge me a ton of money, but also like wanting him to be seen as like a hardworking person, but also for us to not, I don't know, just complicated, but this like desire to be able to relate to anybody. That is always, there's always going to be like some darkness there, I think, sometimes, if it's like across a certain line. Anyway.
Totally. Yeah, thank you for sharing. It feels like we've come to a lot of places of impossibility in or just, the really the depths of everyone's dimensionality, whether it's like in your social space or in your own self-perception. And this is what we're trying to hold in this practice. And this might be the perfect time to do our final prompt and question, which is, what is your self-determined portrait? And maybe I'll just wax poetic briefly, which is just to say that these portraits that we're making are not meant to like solve all these problems or be perfect. And they remind me a lot of like a tattoo, where it can never hold, the perfect emblem for you forever, but it might be this marker of a chapter, or this, just a creation that gets to hold some of your story or a moment of your story. So that's all just to say, like, there's not pressure to think of the perfect thing that equates to you, but rather, like, what are you thinking about lately? What are some important like colors or places? And like Jess was doing a bit, you can kind of reflect on that and think about your internal world and why those choices come up. But also it could be really intuitive just to say, like, there might be something just immediately in your mind's eye, like, this is what I need. So yeah, we're going to give a few minutes to this. Sam, did you want to add to any of that?
Just to say the same, that these pictures aren't meant to be completely definitive, and also that, you know, gets into the conversation of photography and images in general. It's a split second of time, and the point of the project and this exercise is to think about like how that could best be utilized for the person in the image, and how like we as photographers or creators can support that, and also that kind of digs into, you know, the larger question that we're talking about. And like we've been going through these questions around identity, etc., that like it's identity is complex, and also like it's up to the individual in some ways and sometimes not, what we disclose, what is shared, etc., what is seen visibly, what is not. And just that all those things come into play and really speak to, like, you know, the politics and history of photography. So whatever you wish at this moment, perhaps that's the easiest way to think about it.
I'm going to put a brief timer on and I'll let you guys know. But yeah, free writing what's in your mind's eye about your self-determined portrait.
I'm just going to make a little announcement. Sorry to interrupt everyone. We'll give about another minute, but due to time, we're just going to have this be an internal reflection, and we're going to move into part 2 of the event. If anyone really wants to share, maybe at the end we could, if there's time, or also you can email V and I. We're happy to like talk and continue this conversation over email, Zoom, your preferred platform.
I'd just love to underscore that and say, if you have something that you would love to share, this has all been really rich, so please do feel free to drop it in the chat. For me personally, this prompt, I think, was even harder than the ones that came before, only because I found myself thinking about ways to make visible the things that I feel are often invisible about myself. And Sam and V, it made me wonder if, you know, that's a dynamic that you have encountered in connection with the self-portrait service, and if, you know, that's something you could share as well as we begin to transition into your talk.
Yes. Yeah, we really wanted to, we started this project with the aim to hold a lot of these complexities and reflect them, but also to, you know, I mean, we'll get more into the details of this once we can share people's images, but we also are utilitarian, and somebody might need a glam photo or a headshot or a family portrait, and we love doing that work as well. It's not always so emblematic or declarative or even poetic. Sometimes it can be very matter of fact and purposeful, and or like part of other people's practices. So yeah, just wanting to also note that sometimes it can be really simple. Like I really like being in my kitchen. I want to have a photo of me in my kitchen, and that could be it. And that can be a prompt for us sometimes. Yeah, I guess this could be our segue into our artist presentation. And this is a photo of us. This is me. This is Sam. And we met at UCLA in the MFA program. I was in new genres and Sam was in the photo department. This is us outside of a UCLA gallery. And yeah, we came to collaborating on and building this project out because of our own, personal concerns in our work and also personal experiences with making images, video and photo of people, as well as being in images in various ways. Let's see. Yeah, Sam, did you want to add to our personal history?
Just that I think it's important. We like to highlight that, a big foundation of this project is collaboration, working with people we're making images of, but also that V and I are collaborating. We collaborated in kind of birthing the concept and then also in everything that comes with making images. Sometimes we're not shooting together. I've shot images without V, V's shot images without me. We've shot some together. It's kind of dependent on locality a lot of the time. But the project is in of itself a collaboration, and we'll explain more how we got to thinking about it more specifically and making it happen.
And we'd love to read you guys a little blurb. We've done some writing on the project, and this can kind of it's like a more expanded description of what we did at the very top of the Zoom. Yeah, so I'm gonna take it away.
Yeah, I apologize about the noise behind me. SPS is a photo portrait practice with its roots anchored in the ethics and protocols of informed consent. This project is ongoing and open to anyone within the LGBTQI spectrum, whatever that means to you. Self-portrait service works in service of our collaborators, their needs, desires, and visions for imagining themselves. We work to empower people to direct and determine their own self-representation.
This free portrait service is for those who have historically been denied access, power, and control of narrative. We aspire to create an archive of sorts through collaborative public that decenters and shares power rather than using a proprietary lens. Collective ownership and collaborative authorship are essential. We hope to provide this service to as many people as possible to help celebrate, document, heal, and support. And these are some images we've made with a lot of people over just about 2.5 years, I guess it's been, that we've been doing this process. And yeah.
Yeah, and also again to say, we're kind of saying this in similar ways about different things, but this is an investigation into collaboration. This is collaboration truly possible? And maybe if you want to go to the next slide, I can talk about it. It makes sense. But again, we're not saying we're experts on this, that we've figured it out, and this is how you make a truly collaborative image, etc. But it was really something that, we're going to talk about how we came up with the project. And, we both have personal elements in it, but also I was also coming more so as a photographer, longtime photographer, always thinking about the history of photography and kind of how it's been, utilized for good and also has a really dark history. Has a history of just like very predominantly in the past and even into the present day at times being, very through a white cis male gaze, very attached to different kind of like anthropological or colonization tools and ways to kind of categorize people. Now, when I think about photography and I look at the images I love, I feel a different thing than that, but I think it's important to reflect upon that. And something we were thinking about in like queer community, and like our work is working, this is about queer community because that's our community. We also think that the process could be applied to many communities. But V and I are queer. And so we were thinking about how queers have been represented. And, you know, although there are many beautiful representations of queer community, they often tend to be through a particular lens or vision of a photographer. And it's not even to specifically say that the people in the images don't like them. It's just that we were interested. We're like, okay, what does it mean if it were different? Like if the people in the pictures actually defined what they look like? What does it mean to experiment with giving up a little bit of power as the photographer, and also be cognizant of the power the photographer has, and also what that means in the larger conversation of images. So that was sort of where I was coming from in coming into this project and using self-portraiture in my work oftentimes too, I'll just say, in order to kind of name who I am making the work and what I represent visually, what privileges I carry, et cetera, in the world, and who's making these images.
Yeah, and a part of this has also been, I've shared a lot of those interests and concerns. As Sam has mentioned, I work a lot in documentary filmmaking, and that has come up a lot about portraying somebody and just what it means to hold a camera and tell someone's story with it, editing. And additionally, through photo, I've had personal experiences that were very formative in wanting this process to just point questions into this process of having a portrait taken. A brief story was that I modeled a bit when I was in my early 20s, and I was often selected for being kind of an androgynous queer person, and usually being photographed by heterosexual cis people, and having my body and portraits being used without my consent beyond any notion of where they went. I saw photos of myself, naked in galleries in Europe, for example, and it felt really disempowering to have my body being moved around, and I had no say in the matter. And I never even actually saw the photos, and I wasn't paid, whatever. So it was just this experience that felt really dehumanizing. And one of the other core elements of this project is that every subject owns these photographs. Sam and I do not own these photographs. We have this contract that we have sculpted that is more a bill of rights, that the person whose image is made determines whether we have access today to show you guys their images and text, whether we can put it in our, when we're in grad school, the thesis show, Instagram, website, they can specify details of that because we really care about that ownership and power, and calling into question who owns what. You're muted.
And then just briefly, we like to touch upon this project being termed as social practice, which initially we did not term it as, and we shied away from a bit, but then other people who were looking at the work started using that terminology a lot. And I guess now that I think more about it, V and I have been like, maybe this is actually social practice, because so much of social practice, which is a very wide term, and I think the question could be asked, what really isn't social practice in many ways? But a lot of social practice art historically has been kind of embedded in this idea that the act of making or creating is just as important as the outcome or the product or the art piece, the thing that goes on the wall or is installed publicly often or something like that. And so for us, we are interested in calling it social practice. We're open again to kind of like figuring that out more, but mostly because the act of taking the photographs and the time that takes, either if it's the conversation before, or even like the text messages or the hanging out while we take the picture, or just that whole act, we feel, and not to be totally corny, but it's true, it's like just as important, if not more so, than sometimes the eventual outcome. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's, I think, where a lot of the interesting stuff comes up, you know.
I wanted to jump in on that and just say that my experience of making the images has definitely been the most, yeah, maybe they're one-to-one, I'm not sure, but the experience of working for somebody in representing themselves has been really staggering. And like, I think that it's been this moment where the person I'm working with or we're working with, it's such an unfamiliar task when there isn't like capital involved. We're not hired, we're here just to help, and we have to talk about a lot of internal, intimate context to be able to represent them well. And it's a really cool, yeah, shift on that sort of client and service relationship that comes often with portraiture or, yeah, with portraiture. Leah, could you define social practice for the group? Sam, did you already do that?
I guess I didn't. I'm sorry. I apologize. That's not fair. I mean, that's what I'm interested in, the fact that I feel like so many things are social practice, but generally social practice art tends to be more engaging with community, engaging with other people, not necessarily just an artist creating something and putting it into the world, but working with people to create meaning. And, you know, within it also usually it's some socially engaged, sometimes you call it social justice oriented work, etc. But it's kind of working with others in community that are not necessarily the artist. But I also, and not necessarily connected to institutions also. Like a lot of public art is termed social practice, for example, because it's made in one way, potentially like with an intention or within a group, and then it's displayed. Does that kind of help?
Definitely. I was interested in hearing your perspective on it. I'm someone who also engages with social practice and creative collaboration. And so if you don't mind, I have one question further on this. So I live in New Orleans, and I am tied through community to Meg Turner's work, which is
I know
10
Meg.
Types of the Queer Community. And Meg had a beautiful show pre-COVID, kind of looking at queer identity through those photographs. But I've also heard Meg say, you know, I'm taking pictures of my community. Their struggles are my struggles. So that's how this is a collaborative work. But I feel like what you're doing is one step further. And I just kind of want to hear more about like the moment at which you moved outside of just like depicting your friends and your lovers and your roommates. Because the fact that you have that contract is super interesting to me. You know, it sets up a whole new set of rules through a document, which is amazing. So I'm just kind of interested in hearing that and like what it was like to start collaborating with people that were not intimates of yours.
I mean, shout out to Meg. I know Meg.
She's awesome.
Meg moved into my apartment in New York when I left New York. I love Meg's work. But yeah, there was like kind of, I mean, I think for me, as I've gone through photography, I can speak for myself. I have always kind of been trying to figure these questions out. And then this project really clicked with V, where we were like, let's just go for it and see if it works. Because we hadn't really seen anything else that had done this. Honestly, that was part of it. If we're missing something, there's a lot of collaborative photography that's beautiful. And I'm not saying we're super completely original, but it was also because we're queers. We're in the queer community. We're invested in like understanding this. And, you know, maybe we should go to the next slide, actually, to bring us into the identity solidarity part, which is that, you know, we're in this community, but this community is very big. And within this community, there is a lot of difference and a lot of different identities, both intersecting, you know, differing. And there are differences oftentimes between us and the people we're collaborating with. And I think that that's the thing that I, maybe neurotically or whichever, am a little hung up on as an image maker, trying to kind of, you know, and I don't want to put my anxiety on to either my work or the people in the images, but thinking about the fact that like, yes, maybe we're both queer, but also like there's differences between us, and what is how can V and I as image makers support whatever it is that someone wants to display, you know? And these differences run the gamut. I mean, you know, it's race, class, ability, then there's interests, you know, and then you, even if you get deeper into like things around BDSM and the specifics of those cultures, you know, et cetera, locality, geography, cultural heritage, et cetera. So for us, the way we see this related to solidarity is that we have access to making images. We make images. We're in your community to a certain point, and I'm interested in seeing what that community wants to look like. Because I know how, you know, I take photographs and I try to always take them with love, because generally I photograph people I know or people who come into my life because they want to be in images, but also, you know, again, it's the question, like, how do we disrupt it? Or even just put the question out there for other people to talk about and also be like, I don't agree with you, you know?
Yeah, that's been one of the best functions of this, is that it's no solve. I don't think there's like a complete picture of how we can do this, you know, one-to-one perfect balance, but it has brought in a lot of really exciting questions, especially into, yeah, community spaces and, you know, capital A art spaces. I'd love to jump into some of these portraits because I think people touch on a lot of this in their texts, and we have a special today, first time ever, having some of these subjects, collaborators reading their text. Yeah, so make sure I'm all set here.
Dearest V plus Sam, we made these photographs a month ago before things seemed to lose/gain momentum and arc towards entropy, and our universities became the first to fall apart. I am receiving these photographs the day after they have labeled COVID-19 a pandemic, and it has been hard to get out of bed, and I've weeped 4 times today because art making is meaning making, and how do you make meaning when things feel so disembodied? The Chinese cowboy is my double. She is an attempt to actualize psychological desires, to transcend my imposed racialized, gendered identities, as well as a catalytic agent that maps the consequences of my body within narratives I don't belong to. And at this moment, she is a memory of the feeling of making meaning with others. With heart, Stephanie.
When I look down into the pit of my stomach, this is the me that I see. There are a million ways I can lose track of myself, and I'm glad to have this image to come back to. I know the look in my eyes here, comfort, some self-deprecating joy that washes easily into lightness. I remember that it rained the night before, and then the mountains were covered in snow. In the wake of a lot of big change, my anxiety has resurfaced in a way that I'm still learning to manage. I started to normalize it in the month or so before surgery, compartmentalizing, lashing out, underestimating, and undermining myself. After surgery, I went into a deep sadness. I felt a void, and I struggled with it. I felt sorry for my behavior, but helpless, immune to change. I think it was an absence of a type of healing that I'm coming back into touch with. I'm grateful for the self-deprecating joy, the levity that keeps me revisiting my fortune, and my being on this plane. No time like the present.
And this is KT. Didn't get their name. This is Aaron.
My bedroom sits in the loft of an A-frame cabin, nestled between a boulevard and a freeway. It is very loud and the most private and public space I've ever occupied. There is no door. The landmarks from my window are a public storage sign, coffee shop, and freeway underpass. I have invited very few people into this space and no lovers. When this was shot, it felt good to lounge on my bed in the middle of the day, to tell Sam the story of my shirt that reads perform quality peace, my pants I dyed with teens, and what I'm taking to a picnic later. We talk a lot, but mostly on porches and at kitchen tables. It feels intimate to have the shoot in my bedroom, even though I barely recognize the space in this light. Sam checks in often to see how I'm feeling. We look through the photos and take some more. I'm often unsure of how my face reads, so this is helpful. I think of all the times I've had my photo taken and how much I've hated it in the past. I wonder if this is the first time I've felt this much control with someone else holding the camera.
This is Emily.
It's picture day, and Mom always wanted my hair nice, so today I comb my hair. It is quite a delicate business maintaining stasis with those thousands or maybe billions of hairs. Mine always desired more to be the tall nighttime wild grass with no law, out in a field somewhere where I always wanted to be, or the billions of stars out in space somewhere where I always wanted to be. In grade school, I had to wear girl clothes. At first, but at least they can be blue. Blue was reward as treasure and truth. Later, I wore black t-shirts, baggy skate t-shirts, and once a teacher told me, "Don't go to the dark side." And then I realized it might have actually been worse to be my truth as the vulnerable, dark, wild grass than to just get a secret blue gift from Mom after a few minutes together, her combing my hair. I was baby pink, too. I didn't want to join the dark side. I wanted to swallow it inside of it. How could I have ever found space within a bucolic backdrop with the tree trunk prop that they told me to nicely place my hands on, but I didn't want nice hands. I wanted a shark-toothed necklace and to disappear. And in the beginning, there was always disappearing, and after a while I realized it's better in the void where nothing is confusing.
This is Eris.
Growing up together, my brother and I were super close. Our lives as two of 6 siblings was chaotic but tight. While he was in middle school and I was in high school, we began to inhabit completely different worlds. My brother was a sensitive, shy person who had found no support from the school system or at home. After years of being homeless, we've been living together for the past 6 months. His first question to me when he moved in was, "How many pull-ups can you do?" None, I responded. He quickly changed that. I can now do 10 pull-ups, and in turn, I require that we go to psychotherapy together. A happy muscular family.
Also a shout out because Eris is here with us today. And thank you always. Beautiful portrait, sending that voice memo, and being here.
This is me. And this was the first one we did. We sort of I was the guinea pig, and we tested our system together. And I'm going to play my pre-recorded reading. On my birthday, I observe and celebrate a death day. Almost drown, blue in that pool. Almost drown, green in that lake. Almost drown, gray in that hospital bed. Almost drown in our bed. Looking up at you and the ceiling fan, you said my name. In this moment, I wanted to wear all of my tears. A glistening Piscean portrait, a wet dog, the water, my body, the water, life and death touch here. And that concludes our screening of the portraits, but we do have some others we can move through briefly without the readings. It can be hard to see the text over Zoom. This is Zanny and Mattia.
This is Zanny and Mattia, and they had wanted to photograph shortly after Zanny had top surgery and sort of showing their intimacy and love in different ways relating. And this is Blue. And Blue, when I had talked to Blue about this, said that she really just wanted to be photographed on top of the roof of the building she lives in, which is in Fort Greene, where she was born and raised. And it's where she kind of goes actually to be alone and thinking, and it's a really special place. Just like I kind of go up there alone most of the time, but that's where I want to be photographed at sunset. So we did that.
This is Sydney Acosta, who wrote, this is Sydney in her studio, and she wrote this contract that it's like a secondary document to the contract we created. That's really, yeah, insightful and speaks to some of the same concerns.
And she had originally made it because she'd had experience with people using her likeness, kind of without her permission or in ways she didn't like. So she was working on this simultaneously while we were starting our project. And we're like, this is an interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Ariel. And Ariel is a really amazing kind of photographer, image theorist, and professor, and writes and thinks a lot about photography and history within that representation, politics, etc. And they asked me to photograph them in this way. It's a long text, but basically really just thinking about the history of photography and how to be seen, and how being photographed by different people felt different ways. For example, in the text, they kind of say something like, what is queerness? What does that look like? Also, the other people, queer photographers who had incorporated or photographed Ariel in their projects about queerness were all cis men, I believe, apart from me. And them working with me, they comment how they took more clothes off and like, what does that mean? What are those comfort levels? And this is Gabby. And Gabby is in a lofted part of her studio, at her art studio at the time. And the text basically explains that this here is a panoramic photograph of a cemetery or a park in Vietnam, in Saigon, where her grandmother was originally buried. But then the government ripped up the park or the cemetery and made it a park, and the remains were moved. And this is something that Gabby only learned about, this kind of very painful history, through her mother recently, and was working with that family history in her art. And she said that she felt she wanted to be represented with that because she was actually at a period of transitioning out of working with family history and wanting to go in a different direction.
I think we have one more, Sam.
This one's mine, which we were debating showing, but I could read it out loud. I have since decided I want to try a different portrait, but I'm trying to, meet vulnerability and transparency with each other. So I've been thinking about making this photo for a long time. It's kind of a joke and also kind of serious. I'm thinking about gender, representation, and landscape, as well as solitude, the expansiveness of all those, and of sex, but also fuck it. Sometimes it's just nice to strap on a cock. I think this is how I feel internally, even if I exist in the world differently often. I can't tell if it's embarrassing, but here we are. And that concludes our artist talk. Thank you, everyone.
So we have time here for questions, and there's been so much richness that has been shared that I'd love to maybe explore the possibility of extending by 5-ish minutes. Sam and V, thank you so much for sharing that work. It's just incredible. I just want to say that. But as I was preparing for tonight's conversation and looking through the portraits that you've begun to develop through the self-portrait service, I was reminded of a really wonderful essay written by Bell Hooks, which discusses the role of visual culture and image making in advancing larger struggles for self-determination. And in the essay, Hooks refers to cameras, and I'll quote here directly, a political instrument, a way to resist misrepresentation, as well as a means by which alternative images could be produced. And so I was wondering if you are thinking about the power of cameras on similar terms, and I guess if so, if there are any through lines you see being advanced in the alternative imagery and sort of archive that you're co-constructing with your partners.
I could jump in, which is just to say that I think the thing I'm most excited to hold in this project is the trying and the effort and the showing the work of this impossibility we all kind of arrived at and talked about, because I don't think I think the camera will always have the inherent imbalances and history, and it's just like a relationship in that way where there's always going to be different work to be done between people to meet some kind of understanding, and that understanding is still imperfect. And so, yeah, the thing I'm excited about in our work is to, in the text, and even, I mean, we're excited about this experiment of having people reading their text, because previously it was the static image and the silent voice, and there's something to hearing someone's own reading of their writing that has been really special. Sam?
Yeah, I guess just to keep it brief, I mean, a lot of what Bell Hooks writes, I'm a fan of and agree with. And I do think, it's not a new conversation to talk about the camera this way. And again, I just want to say that. And that, yes, I think the archive in this has a through line in that way of being in conversation with what is the alternative image, and is the alternative image possible? I mean, for me as a photographer, as a friend, as a community member, an artist, I hope that the images in this project, which I'll be specific to this project, are just well received by the people who are in them. And that to me is, the beginning of an archive. And also to understand, and it's, within the whole thing too, is that time changes, people change, feelings change. And also at any point, people can kind of rescind these images also, especially since we're working with a community that presentation, representation, gender specifically often is something that is malleable. It's not, doesn't have to be definitive. It can change over time. And sometimes, an image of you from 2 years ago doesn't fit the mark anymore. So I think using those kind of things to inform the way that we're building an archive is potentially, hopefully, a new way of thinking about it. But I will never say it's brand new. It's more in conversation with people like Bell Hooks or people who have come before us, and our contemporaries too, like even Meg, who was mentioned earlier. I hope that answered the question.
No, it does. Thank you. I'll go ahead and ask another, but I definitely invite other folks to weigh in with any questions that you have as well. But one of the questions that's coming to mind is that, Sam, as we were planning for tonight's conversation, you mentioned that the self-portrait service was motivated in part by your desire to sort of push the conversation and move past lazy representational politics. And that's stuck with me ever since. I've been thinking about that and was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that idea, what you mean by that, and any ways that you hope the project does help us expand the ways that we think and talk about and understand identity.
Sure. I'm like, I said that, okay. It's not completely what I don't think. Sometimes you forget what you say. Yeah, I think that maybe it comes back to this question of when was the decision to take this other step into the conversation with people in the images, right? And for me, again, as a photographer, I'm always thinking about representation. I'm thinking about what I'm representing, and I'm only speaking for myself here, but what I'm representing as a queer, white, non-binary femme person in the world, and using a camera to do that. And so sometimes I think representation gets thrown around as a word that's just kind of like a band-aid for things. This is a representation of this. This is speaking to this. And, collaboration even gets kind of used in a loose way. And my point of interest is just being like, you know, it's not gonna be perfect all the time and I'm gonna make mistakes and I've made mistakes and, you know, but I want to keep talking about like what these words actually mean and how they could potentially be activated beyond kind of just, this is a representation of, it's like, what does it mean to talk about representation and like think about agency and see what can come of those conversations that isn't just kind of checking boxes, I guess. But also, you know, I'm still figuring it out, I guess. And I'm a nerd also when it comes to photography and history. And I just love to talk about these things. And I love to talk to people about pictures of themselves. And I have people photograph me all the time as like an exercise because I hate being photographed, but I do it. I do it. I think both me and Eris have taken pictures of me. So they know. Thank you. Yeah. If that was enough of an explanation.
Thank you.
Your project is just so dynamic and exciting. So, I mean, huge compliments on that. And I'm just thinking about how it might play into other communities that lack representation. And I wonder if you've considered working with incarcerated folks before.
Bea, do you want to go? I can go.
I think you should start this one.
Okay. Yeah, I think, well, first of all, like we kind of mentioned, we started in this community because we were talking about this and queerness and, you know, queer for queer sort of thing, but also really feel like the process can be expanded into any community. And it's actually kind of an interesting long-term goal to be like, here's this funny little model, you know, and another transparency in my workshop that I taught with Urbano for 10 weeks, this was the project that inspired that class. So there was elements of this that we kind of talked about. And as far as incarcerated folks, yes, I mean, I actually, you know, I work with an organization that does arts education in both juvie and maximum security prisons, and I'm involved in other decarceral abolitionist organizations here in Los Angeles. So yes, I think that that would be an amazing thing to do. And there are also a lot of organizations that are playing around with these ideas as well. Obviously, the red tape to even work inside is incredibly hard. And what incarcerated people are allowed to have access to is, you know, we could go down the list of reasons that is completely messed up. But yeah, the representation of that community could do wonders for actually understanding what mass incarceration is in this country. I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but if I were able to kind of help push that work, and maybe not even myself do it, but facilitate and help get that idea out there and people to photograph themselves, like, yeah, that would be amazing, I think. And other communities in general, you know. I think we also just want to be, again, it was like, what's our entry point? You know, I don't want to speak for other people, especially experiences I don't have, but I also would be really happy in the future world to hand this process off and be like, here's this thing, like, if you thought about it, or if you have it, doesn't matter. Maybe this would be fun for you, or would be empowering, or be interesting, or just be a tool, you know, a real tool, like a utilitarian act of care is what we initially called it. Do you want to add? Sorry.
I think you nailed it.
Well, I'll go ahead and ask one last question, even though there are so many more that can be asked. This has been really generative, but you know, in addition to being, you know, artists, you're both very committed educators, and you know that seems to be also a core or perhaps just important part of your artistic identity. So that being said, I was wondering what you hope you know, your students learn about what it means to be an artist in society.
I can jump in on this one. Kind of, yeah, I think the thing I'm most excited to like hold for myself as a maker and like see grow in my students is showing the questions or showing the questions that go unseen. And that's, I mean, I feel like I'm reiterating a bit, but the things that function in this work aren't the solves or like a, you know, the perfect radical system. It's about pointing questions at other histories and at the processes that are a part of this making, and asking yourself why multiple times over to get to maybe a deeper truth or a crux at the core of work. That's my big focal point.
And I guess I would respond similarly. I would echo a lot of what just V said. Right, the question is what you most hope that students learn from you about what it means to be an artist in society. I think, I'm trying to think about what I tell my students. I tell them so many things. I'm so sick of hearing from me. But I think something along the lines of, I really think it's important to kind of do internal work first and like figure out like what matters to you, what you care about, what your connections are, and then how that can facilitate making work in the world, either just of your own accord or with others, if that makes sense. And I think that is something that even as someone who went through art school, et cetera, didn't always feel encouraged to do. I felt really like production-based, external, make. Like I literally had photography professors say to me like, think, don't shoot, shoot, don't think, like shooting pictures. And, you know, like, I understand like giving yourself into the medium and like expressing yourself, that there is definitely, you know, value to that. But I also think that it's, you know, it's like if you're an artist in the world, it's a privilege. It shouldn't be a privilege, but it can sometimes be and it's a gift and it's beautiful, and like make sure that you're enjoying it, but also that maybe there's a way for others to enjoy it and how it can be, you can be kind of like a vessel for so many things, you know, and that comes from inside out first.
Thank you for that. On that note, I'll go ahead and bring us to a close. And I have to say and admit that I can't really take credit for planning it this way. It was serendipity of the calendar, basically. But tonight's conversation has really been the perfect follow-up to our last session, which was focused on storytelling and issues of representation, power, and joy. And as tonight's conversation, I think, illuminates is, you know, what are images, if not a vehicle for helping us unpack and even amplify our questions as we, you know, work to communicate our stories to other people. And what I appreciate so much about your project, Sam and V, is that, you know, your work subtly, but I think also powerfully and radically, I'd argue, pushes us to reframe how we think about identity, not as something that is static, singular, or even individualistic, but really something that is inherently dynamic, multiple, and relational. You know, we're all moving through the world with multiple different identities. And even when we share certain identity markers with others, like race, class, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, et cetera, we live and experience those in different ways. And so I think your project, does a beautiful job of reminding us that when we acknowledge and make space for those differences, for those multiples, we also create space, paradoxically, it's kind of funny, but we create space for the emergence of connection and solidarity across lines of difference that we might have not seen or recognized before. So I'm grateful to you both for sharing your work, for helping us see past binaries, and for being, you know, opening up space for us to see and understand each other in new ways. So I wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight. And I have just noticed that we have a hand that was raised. So I'm sorry. Yes, please go ahead. And then we'll close.
Hi, I just wanted to say how much I love the project, and in general, how close it's brought me to, I mean, it's funny to say because I just gifted my dad one of the photos that Sam took of me and my brother. And then I also hung it up in my house, hung up the other one of our bags. And it just made me realize like all the ways in which like what this photo means to me. Because, I grew up intersex and I didn't have breasts growing up and I never got a period. And growing up with my brother, like I would always walk around without a shirt and that made him uncomfortable. And then now when he moved in with me, like that was one of the things of him moving in with me was just like, hey, get used to it. Like we live together and I like to walk around topless. Like this is my house. And he didn't care. Like he didn't care about that. And that's not a story. And it's just like when you're saying the multiplicity identities and stuff, the other thing, for me, what came up when she told me about the story was the fact that we had been doing pull-ups. And that was like such a deep connection for us at the moment because we're both very into exercise, and growing up, it was the way that we bonded. So we were bonding again in that way now in our 30s. And I wanted to say thanks to Sam for really taking an amazing photo as usual.
Thank you, Eris. I was gonna call on you to see if you wanted to respond to anything, but I didn't want to call you out. So I'm glad you were.
Oh, you can call me out anytime. You know me. I love to talk.
So yeah, thank you. I mean, I love that image so much, and working to make that with you was amazing. And also, I just want to say that Eris's work is really amazing too, filmmaker. So you all should check that out.
Eris, can you drop a link if you feel comfortable?
Sorry, now I really am calling you out.
But moreover, thank you for sharing that. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight, for deciding to spend a portion of your evening with us, for committing to one more Zoom when you could have done a million other things. It's been wonderful to be in conversation with all of you. Thank you, Sam and V, one more time. Bravo to your work. And I just also wanted to say that we'll be continuing the Create, Connect, Catalyze discussion series again, Tuesday, May 11th, same time, same place, this Zoom room. And we invite everyone to join us and hope to see you there. Hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye, take care.